Hey there everyone, Mychal Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and in preparation for our upcoming Horary Astrology certification program, which begins January 10th, 2026, we're going to be diving into a series of horary charts so that you can see how I delineate horary charts, and you can also see how you can use some of these same tools and skills to do the same. So today we're going to be diving into some love horaries, because amongst the questions that people ask, there aren't really questions that are as prominent or as prevalent within an astrologer's practice as love questions. So we're going to be starting with this chart, which is coming from a client who called me at, I think it was 9:30 p.m. at night. And this is a part of why I don't give my number to people in general, because a client called me at 9:30 p.m. at night because her friend wanted to know if she was in a relationship with the right person. So this person asked, is my current love the right person? The time of the horary is 9:51 p.m. on July 6th, 2019, which was a Saturday in Nassau, Bahamas. Now, even though this client was calling from Jamaica, I cast the chart for my location because that is the pact that I've made with the universe. Divination is based on specific pacts that we make with the universe. My pact with the universe is that I'm going to only erect a horary chart for the exact time and location of where I am when I receive and also understand the question. There are horary questions that I've received that I did not understand, and therefore I have not erected charts for them, because I only erect a horary chart for the exact time and location that I receive, but also understand the question. Those two things, the reception of the question and the understanding of the question, are absolutely vital for me as far as accurate horary astrology is concerned. Now, whenever I look at a chart, the first thing that I do is I look at the first house within that chart. The cusp of the first house is called the Ascendant. The first house itself is only called the first house. The first house is not called the Ascendant. Only the cusp of that first house is called the Ascendant. So this line, this first house cusp, demarcates our Ascendant within this chart. In horary astrology, we care more about planets and their specific significations than we do about planets and their universal significations. So for example, we know that the Moon is the goddess that represents your mother and young women in your life in general, and all sorts of things that have to do with femininity and womanhood. However, within this chart, none of those things are relevant in relation to the moon, because within this chart, the moon is the specific ruler or the specific significator of the sixth house. The sixth house is the house of stress and sickness. Therefore, where the moon goes isn't where we expect to find our mother. Where the moon goes is where we expect to find stress and sickness. Similarly, we know that Mercury is the god of intelligence and communication and mercantile endeavors or marketplace transactionality. That's what Mercury represents in general. However, within this specific chart, Mercury is the specific significator of the eighth house, which is representing the wealth of this woman's partner. Mercury is also the ruler of the fifth house, which is representing this woman's children and her fertility potential in general. However, everything that we can say about this Mercury universally is of no relevance, because the reality is when we're looking at this Mercury, we are focusing on him as a specific significator as opposed to a universal significator. And this is one of the first places where we find this distinction being made between horary astrology and other systems of astrology, or specifically horary astrology and natal astrology. Because from a natal astrological perspective, we care about planets both as universal significators of concepts in general, i.e., Mercury as a significator of the mind and communication and commerce and small children and mercantile endeavors, transactionality within the marketplace and travel and things of that nature. Because in natal astrology, those significations of Mercury are going to be more important. Similarly, we care about the moon in natal astrology as being a universal significator of our mother, because that identity of the moon as mother within natal astrology makes more sense within the context of that astrology. Within horary astrology, our first orientation has to be that I'm going to look at these planets not as universal significators as their primary function within this chart, but I'm going to look at these planets as specific significators based on the specific houses that they rule within this specific chart. That has to be our primary default when it comes to horary astrology, because astrology as it stands is a confusing subject in general, especially when we don't approach it in a skillful way. Therefore, if we're going to be doing any sort of chart delineation, we need to have a system, and more than having a system, we need to have a way of organizing our information so that it only takes us further and further into the heart of clarity and farther away from anything that might potentially sully or confuse or cloud the clarity that we're trying to establish. So, step one in horary astrology is that we need to know that the primary roles of these planets within this chart are for those planets to be specific significators or the rulers of houses. So the first thing that we take a look at within this chart is the ruler of the first house, because that planet is going to give us some insight into what is specifically going on with the person to whom this chart belongs. Now, there's a large body of people within horary astrology practice who believe that it is sufficient to simply understand what's going on with the significator of the querent. I say significator of the querent because insofar as this is horary astrology, I cannot say significator of the native, because the word native belongs to natal astrology and the person who owns the chart from a natal astrology perspective, and the word querent belongs to horary astrology and the person who is creating the query or asking the question from a horary astrology perspective. So as I look at this chart, the first thing I want to know is what is going on with the significator of my querent. Saturn isn't my querent because the querent is a lady on the phone in Jamaica. So that is who the querent is. I'm not looking for the querent. The querent is who I'm talking to on the phone. I'm looking for the planet that signifies the querent within this chart, because the planet that signifies the querent is going to give me insight into ultimately what is going on with that person in this moment of her coming and asking this question. And the first thing that we see is that Saturn is at 17 degrees Capricorn, 24 minutes retrograde, and in the 12th house. Now, any Oraculos student would know that that statement needs correction, because we cannot just say that Saturn is at 17 degrees Capricorn, 24 minutes retrograde in the 12th house. The fact that Saturn is at 17 degrees Capricorn means something from an essential dignity or debility perspective, and the fact that Saturn is in the 12th house means something from an essential dignity or debility perspective. So the first thing I have to say is that Saturn is essentially dignified at 17 degrees Capricorn, 24 minutes retrograde, and accidentally debilitated by being in the 12th house of silent suffering, one's hidden enemies, and self-undoing. So the next statement I say has to be an assessment of that Saturn based on the previous things I've said. So I'm going to say this Saturn is in a mixed state. Now, truthfully, there's enough going on with this Saturn for us to say that Saturn is in a specifically bad state. However, I'm going to say this Saturn is in a mixed state. What that means is that there are elements that we find going on with this Saturn that are causing this Saturn to do well, and there are elements that are causing this Saturn to do bad. So first of all, I speak about the essential dignity of the planets whenever I'm doing horary astrology, because the essential dignity or debility of the planets is what is closest to the heart of that planet. That is what that planet cares about the most. That is what is manifesting within the heart of hearts of that planet. That is what I need to talk about as my first recourse within this horary astrology delineation. What is going on with this planet from an essential dignities or debilities perspective? Because essential dignity / debility either strengthens or weakens the essence of that planet. So I see this Saturn is in the sign of his domicile. I know that Saturn is in the sign of his domicile because Saturn rules 2 signs within the zodiac. Saturn rules Capricorn and Saturn rules Aquarius. Those are the 2 signs that Saturn rules in the zodiac. Now, as professional astrologers, it is insufficient for us to say that Saturn rules 2 signs of the zodiac, because our understanding of rulership is very broad, and our understanding of rulership is not just based on Saturn being the domicile ruler of this sign. Our understanding of rulership is also based on this larger context of rulership that doesn't just have to do with the domicile rulership, which Saturn has in Capricorn and Aquarius, but it also has to do with the exaltation rulership, which is another level of rulership. It also has to do with the triplicity rulership, which is another level of rulership. It also has to do with the term or bound rulership, term/bound, because they both mean the same thing. It has to do with the bounds rulership. It also has to do with the face or the decanic rulership, face or decan rulership. All of these are levels of rulership. So as intelligent astrologers striving to better ourselves within our field and our practice, we cannot just say Saturn rules Aquarius or Saturn rules Capricorn. We have to say that Saturn is the domicile ruler of Aquarius. Saturn is the domicile ruler of Capricorn, which is what we see here on our table, because to say that Saturn rules Aquarius or Capricorn is insufficient. Now, our table also gives us a little bit more information, because our table is also letting us know that Saturn doesn't just rule Aquarius and Capricorn, and that he's not just the domicile ruler of those signs, but Saturn is the domicile ruler of Capricorn, which is his nighttime or his nocturnal sign, and Saturn is the domicile ruler of Aquarius, which is his diurnal or his daytime sign. Now, we know that Saturn, from a traditional astrological perspective, is a diurnal planet, a daytime planet, according to Claudius Ptolemy. And Claudius Ptolemy's view on that is the same view that all of us tend to hold today. Saturn is a diurnal planet, and as a result of that, Saturn is thought to do better when he is in Aquarius than when he is in Capricorn. Therefore, if we were just to look at that piece of information, that Saturn as a diurnal planet does better in Aquarius than he does in Capricorn, if we go back and take a look at the chart now, we already have a little piece of an interpretation. And the little piece of interpretation that we have is that, of the 2 signs that Saturn could potentially be in, as far as his domiciles are concerned, Saturn is in the sign that isn't his favorite domicile. He's in the house that he does not favor as much as his other house, which is going to be the Aquarius. So that's already telling us that as far as this Saturn is concerned, there's something a little bit off about him. And the reason why that's an important piece of information for us to have within our mind is because it starts to get us thinking in the direction of, okay, maybe this already isn't going to go in the direction that we want for it to go. Now, the reality is that Saturn being in this domicile is a pretty good thing in general, and we don't mind Saturn in Capricorn, not even one little bit. However, when we are practicing horary astrology, everything has to be a clue that points us in the direction of an outcome. Because how long are you going to sit down and look at the chart and scratch your head and say, I don't know what's going on here in this chart? Every single thing that you see within that chart has to be a clue that ultimately is pointing us all towards a very specific outcome. And so, even though the Saturn in Capricorn initially within my heart of hearts doesn't feel like a challenging thing, I've already observed the other challenges going on with this Saturn. And so therefore, since I see that Saturn is challenged because he's retrograde and challenged because he's in the worst house of heaven, from an astrological perspective, the 12th house is thought of as being the worst house of the entire cosmos. And the only other 2 houses that are thought to be bad in the way that the 12th house is bad are going to be the 6th house and the 8th house. So the 6th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house are evil houses of heaven. I had somebody the other day ask me on YouTube a question and put a good house in brackets, as if the idea of good house and bad house, it's somehow relegated to the past tense. Good house and bad house is in no way, shape, or form relegated to the past tense. If you were born in this lifetime and the rule of your ascendant is in the 12th house, that is determinately a problem. And maybe you have wonderful aspects to the ruler of your ascendant while you're dwelling within your 12th house. And maybe those wonderful aspects cause it not to feel like a problem. But if you have the ruler of your ascendant in your 12th house in this lifetime, that is already a problem. And we as astrologers need to be able to call a spade. And we also need to know that that is most definitely, most assuredly, indubitably a problem to have the rule of the ascendant in the 12th house. The surrounding factors might soften the edge of that problem. The surrounding factors might make you feel amazing and loved and blessed and fulfilled in your 12th house. But if you were in that 12th house without those surrounding factors, and if the ruler of your ascendant were also afflicted while in the 12th house, it most definitely would be a problem. So here we see in this chart, we have the ruler of the ascendant, which is Saturn, present within the 12th house, which is already a problem, but we're not at that part of the delineation yet, because we simply need to be interpreting what it means for Saturn to be in his domicile of Capricorn. So I'm going to say to this lady, you seem to be in a situation in which you know that you should feel comfortable. You know that you should be in a position of power. You know that you should be in a position where you feel as if all of your needs are attended to because you are Saturn residing in his domicile. You know that you should feel more at home, more at peace, and more grounded within the situation that you find yourself in. And you know all of these things to be true. Now, we need to look within the chart and see, are these things actually true? And the first thing that we see that informs us that no, these things are not actually true is the fact that she is Saturn in his domicile and retrograde. Bethem, when he was writing his Centiloquium, said that a planet in its own domicile, but their retrograde, is like a sick man in his own home. A planet in his own domicile, but their retrograde, is like a sick man within his own home. And so what we see here is that she knows that she should feel good in the situation. She knows that she should be in a situation that's taking care of her. She knows that she should be in a situation in this relationship where she feels like the queen of her castle and as if all of her needs are being met and attended to. However, she is retrograde. Therefore, she also knows that there is something that fundamentally feels as if it's eating away at her personal vitality in this relationship. Because as she takes one step forward, she finds herself taking 2 steps back, and she finds herself not actually being able to tap into the vitality that she knows should rightfully be hers based on the position that she's holding within this relationship. So this is what I said to her in relationship to this Saturn being in Capricorn and retrograde. Now, the next thing that we have to say to her is what it means for this Saturn to be accidentally debilitated while in the 12th house. Now, we need to know that a planet can be essentially dignified or accidentally fortified, or it can be essentially debilitated or accidentally debilitated. There is no such thing as an accidental dignity. There is no such thing as an accidental dignity. And I really want to pull this down and close this. There is absolutely no such thing on God's green earth as an accidental dignity. And I was asked once to review a book that a friend of mine, colleague of mine, who was writing a medical astrology book, or a traditional astrology book, actually. And we got to the chapter where this friend of mine was talking about accidental dignities and debilities. And I turned around and I said to this person, I said, hey, you know that there really aren't any accidental dignities in traditional astrology. We don't use that language. You can't accidentally be the Queen of England. You can't accidentally be the Prime Minister of the Bahamas. You can't accidentally be Justin Trudeau, even though he's not the Prime Minister of anything. You can't accidentally be in a state of dignity at all. So this language of accidental dignity does not exist in traditional astrology. We can have accidental fortitudes, things that strengthen you from the outside, but we can't have accidental dignities, things that make you royal from the outside, because that royalty has to be something that comes from your essence. Therefore, there is essential dignity, and there's accidental fortitude, However, the word debility is used for both. There's essential debility and there's accidental debility as well. So within this chart, Saturn is accidentally debilitated because Saturn is located within the 12th house. Now, why is this important? This is important because the 12th house is one of the worst houses of heaven from a traditional astrological perspective. Now, whenever I talk like this, people get offended. People get offended. And the only reason you could get offended if you are hearing something being said astrologically is if your entire identity as an astrologer is egotistically rooted within yourself. The only way you could get offended by going to somebody's astrology lecture is if there's a part of you that cannot detach yourself from the part of you that is present within your chart. Therefore, everything that that person possibly says is going to come across as an offense to you personally because you haven't learned an astrology that is not you-centric. Every astrology that you've learned has been, let me look at my own chart, let me look at my own chart, let me look at my own chart, not knowing that that is only one branch of a four-branched astrological system and tradition that we have within the West. So whenever I say that the 12th house is an evil house, the 8th house is an evil house, and the 6th house is an evil house, the astrologers, more often than not, the modern astrologers, they get very bent out of shape because evil doesn't exist in modern astrology and evil doesn't exist as an absolute term, and therefore they want to know why I'm saying it. Because when the hell were you born, Mychal? 1647? No, I wasn't born in 1647, but I practiced traditional astrology, and I practice an astrology based on logic and rooted in sense, not rooted in my feelings about the world. And insofar as I'm practicing an astrology rooted on sense and not rooted in my feelings about the world, the 6th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house are considered to be, and have always been considered to be, the most evil houses of heaven. Why is that? The ancients like to live. The ancients like to live. And maybe you'll feel a little bit more traditional astrology adjacent when you realize that you also like to live. The ancients like to live. They like things that were alive. They like things that were breathing. And they fundamentally like to live. They did not like things that had no vitality and that were associated with corruption and death. Now, from a chart perspective, the only house within this chart that holds life is the first house, which is why another name for the first house is the house of life. You could literally call the first house life, and that would be an appropriate name for the first house, because the first house is representing the allotment of universal life force energy that we all have within this lifetime by which to live, breathe, and have our being. If a house is not having a symbolic aspect-based relationship to the first house, then that house is thought of to be dead. That house is thought of to be a place of no movement. That house is thought of to be a place of sickness. That house is thought of as being a place where there is no life. The 6th house, symbolically, is making a quincunx to the ascendant. And as we can see, even though we're using a quadrant-based house system, the 6th house is symbolically in the quincunx to the ascendant, but also literally. The 6th house cusp is in the quincunx to the first house cusp within this specific chart. So the 6th house is making a quincunx relationship to the ascendant. The 8th house is making a symbolic quincunx relationship to the ascendant, and it just so happens that within this chart, we have a literal quincunx between the 8th house cusp and the first house cusp. And similarly, the 12th house is having no relationship to the ascendant at all. The reason why we say that is because houses that are exactly adjacent to one another cannot be thought of as houses that have a relationship with one another. Therefore, the 12th house is thought of as being one of the most evil houses of heaven because the 12th house is having no relationship to the ascendant whatsoever. Now, people often ask me, well, if that's the case, Mychal, why isn't the 2nd house thought of as also being an evil house? And the reason for this is because the 2nd house isn't just adjacent to the ascendant, but the 2nd house is following the ascendant, and therefore the ancients felt as if the 2nd house was benefiting from the power that was held within the ascendant as an angle, as a trickle-down effect. So we can say that the battery of life is in this first house, and the trickle-down effect of that battery is in the 2nd house, and therefore the 2nd house is having some level of power that the 12th house isn't having. One, because it's a succeedant house. Two, because it succeeds or it follows the first house. And three, because it's not a cadent house. Whereas the 12th house is a cadent house and having no relationship to the ascendant whatsoever, and being as far away from the angle within that particular quadrant as possible. The 12th house is as far away from the angle of that 10th house as possible. Therefore, the 12th house has no vital power that it can appropriate unto itself. So that is our understanding of the houses and the powers of the houses. And to that end, the 12th house is thought of as being the most evil house of heaven. Now, another reason why the ancients thought the 12th house was the most evil house of heaven is because the 12th house is the 8th house from the 5th house. And if the 5th house is the house of our children, then the 12th house, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 12th house is the 8th house from the house of our children, and therefore is representing the death of our children. I think that's a pretty good skull. The 12th house is therefore representing the death of our children. So the ancients thought that the 12th house was particularly despicable because not only is it a cadent house that's having no relationship to the ascendant, but it's also the house that represents the death of my offspring, which is why the ancients also thought that the 12th house was a house of silent and unspeakable suffering. Therefore, with that being the background of the 12th house, for the rule of the ascendant to be in the 12th house is also representing that this woman finds herself in a state at this moment where she's in a state of silent and unspeakable suffering. She can't even bring herself to put life to the words that define how she's feeling within this particular situation. Now, we're also told by Abraham ibn Ezra, who was a medieval Jewish astrologer, that when a planet is within the 12th house, but also essentially dignified while there, it represents vexation and frustration. When a planet is in the 12th house and also essentially dignified while there, it represents vexation and frustration. Because if you are in your domicile or your exaltation, which are the two major essential dignities, and you now find yourself in the house of heaven that does not allow you to express the power that you have within yourself, then of course you're going to be vexed and fearful. That's actually what he says. He doesn't say vexation and frustration. He says when a planet is in the 12th house or the 6th house and essentially dignified while there, it represents that that person is vexed and fearful. Of course you're vexed and fearful because you, for all of the power that you have within yourself as being Saturn in your domicile, find yourself in a situation where you can't do anything. You cannot do anything. You are absolutely helpless. It's like people who have all the golden doubloons. Is that what you call those coins? It's like people who have all the money in the world, all the money that one can ever desire to have within this lifetime, and then they find themselves in the middle of the ocean on a dinghy, a tiny boat, with all of their money and all of their accolades surrounding them, and they cannot turn that money into a hamburger. They cannot even turn that money into an apple, because for all of the money and the resources that they have, they are still up the creek without a paddle, and what they really need right now, more than that money, is a paddle. And that's what it means for a person to be in their 12th house in this sort of way, while also being essentially dignified. So I said to her, you feel as if you're in a great situation on the inside, but externally your circumstances don't actually allow you to exercise that greatness outside of yourself. Your circumstances aren't allowing you to externally feel great. You know that you are great. You know the capacity that you have within yourself for greatness, but the circumstances that you find yourself in are not circumstances that align you to express the greatness that you feel inside. And so as a result of that, you feel vexed and frustrated because you don't know how you got to be in this situation that you're in right now. But here you are in this situation with this man who we haven't even started to talk about yet, but with this man who is possibly keeping you bound in a situation that keeps you feeling both vexed, but also undervalued, and also fundamentally fearful about your own future and your own security in general. This is what we derive from having the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th house and retrograde while there. Now, we can step away from that and we can go and take a look at what's happening on the other side of the chart. The other side of the chart is going to give us the ruler of the querant, and that's going to be the ruler of my 7th house over here is going to be the significator of the querant. And that is what we are going to do within part 2 of this Horary Astrology delineation. Hey there, everyone. If you enjoyed part 1 of our Horary Astrology delineation, then please make sure to stick around for part 2, and also make sure to like and subscribe to the Oraculos podcast wherever you find us on the internet, so that you can keep your finger on the pulse of all things magical happening at Oraculos. And as you know, this entire presentation is specifically to get you fired up about our upcoming Horary Astrology certification program, which is beginning this January 10th, 2026, right here on the internet. I was going to say right here in Nassau, Bahamas, but I haven't been there for a long time. It's happening right here on the internet, where I will be teaching you everything that I know about the topic of Horary Astrology in general. And if you haven't already purchased my book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, please make sure to do so, because the majority of what I know about Horary Astrology is held within this book. And in our upcoming certification program, we're going to go all the more deeper into the content of this book. And I'll be sharing with you things that did not make it to the book and what actually occurs within my Horary Astrology practice. So I cannot wait to have you there. And if you want to join that course, please make sure to visit our website at oraculosastrology.com and check out our education page so that you can dive into our upcoming Horary Astrology certification program today.